What up, everyone? This is going to be another episode of Solar Powered Take Around the League. We're going to be starting off by just saying that this is going to be NFC only, and then the next video will be AFC only. So we're going to start off with just NFC only. We're going to start off with the Bears, who have a cap of $44.8 million. This free agent signing that they just had during the offseason, they got cornerback Bryce Callahan for a 2-year, $28 million contract. They also got defensive tackle Frank Clark to a 1-year, $4.8 million contract. Center Quentin Spain for a 1-year, $4.8 million contract. And then left tackle Donovan Smith for a 3-year, $40.2 million contract. They also got receiver Julio Jones to a 2-year, $14.8 million contract. Bears, go ahead and hit up the Falcons. I know they want Julio Jones back, so just keep that in mind, Bears. They also got left end D Ford for a 1-year, $7.6 million contract. So they made all these signings, and at the end have a $44.8 million cap space. Some needs that they need is, according to Madden, that is a quarterback, a left outside linebacker, and a left tackle. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and move on to the Bucks. They had a signing of strong safety Ronnie Harrison Jr. for a 3-year, $12 million contract. Tight end Foster Moreau for a 1-year, $4.6 million contract. The Bucks also signed receiver Sammy Watkins to a 1-year, $5.3 million contract. Right outside linebacker Denzel Perryman to a 2-year, $13.8 million contract. And at the end of all these signings, they have a cap space of $7.8 million. A couple needs that Madden says that the Bucks need is a left tackle, a quarterback, and a left outside linebacker. We're going to go ahead and move over to the Cardinals, who signed tight end Austin Hooper to a 3-year, $21.3 million contract. Receiver Deontay Hardy to a 3-year, $19.5 million contract. Defensive tackle Tershawn Wharton to a 2-year, $7.4 million contract. Left end Jabari Zuniga, to a 1-year, $3.3 million contract. And cornerback James Pierre to a 2-year, $5.4 million contract. After all these signings, they have a cap space of $16.5 million. A couple needs that Madden says that the Cardinals need is right outside linebacker, right tackle, and a middle linebacker. Commanders, they signed middle linebacker CJ Mosley to a 2-year, $13 million contract. Quarterback Geno Smith to a 1-year, $2.7 million contract. And cornerback Kyle Fuller to a 1-year, $5.1 million contract. And at the end of all these signings, they had a total of $10.2 million in cap space. A couple needs that Madden says that the Commanders need is right outside linebacker, quarterback, and left outside linebacker. All right, so one of our first teams with negative cap space is going to be the Cowboys, who signed cornerback James Bradbury to a 2-year, $20.2 million contract, and kicker Josh Lambo to a 1-year, $2.4 million contract. And at the end of these signings, the Cowboys have a negative $8.19 million in cap space. They need to start trading some players and start working on their cap space immediately. The Madden community also says that Cowboys need a center, right tackle, and a left end. So I guess they're going to be having some trouble in the trenches this year. So we'll see what happens with that. All right, guys, we'll be moving on to the Eagles, who also have a negative cap space as well, who signed center Austin Blythe for a 1-year, $4.8 million contract. Cornerback Marcus Peters to a 2-year, $29 million contract. Strong safety Jordan Poyer for a 3-year, $33.9 million contract. Right tackle Andre Dillard to a 3-year, $27 million contract. And receiver Will Fuller for a 4-year, $26 million contract. Again, the Eagles, after all these signings, have a negative $220,000 cap space. So they need to start training some players as well. I don't know if they're in a win now attitude or what it is, but still negative cap space is never a good thing, no matter what it is, especially moving forward. A couple needs that the Eagles need is quarterback, left outside linebacker, and a center, which I guess they signed through Austin Blythe, but I don't know. Falcons, who signed left tackle Devin Cochran to a 2-year, $4.6 million contract. Fullback Ben Mason to a 3-year, $13.5 million contract. Right outside linebacker Cameron McGrone to a 3-year, $7.2 million contract. Right guard Josh Seltzner to a 2-year, $2 million contract. And left guard Jackson Carmen to a 2-year, $7 million contract. Right tackle Carson Green to a 2-year, $2.6 million contract. At the end of all these signings, the Falcons still have a $42.3 million cap space. A couple needs that Madden says they need is a right guard, a running back, and a defensive tackle. Moving on to the 49ers, who only made 2 signs this year during the offseason, which is punter Sam Martin to a 2-year, $4 million contract, and kicker Jason Myers to a 1-year, $2.6 million contract. The 49ers are sitting at a negative $1.08 million cap space, so they need to start trading some of their superstars as well. I don't see them signing anybody amazing back. They need to start sending them off somewhere else, especially get some of that cap space back. It looks like rebuild mode is in the future. A couple of needs that the 49ers seem to be needing is right defensive end, quarterback, and right guard. We're going to go ahead and move on to the Giants, who made quite a bit of signings during the offseason and still have a positive cap space, which is amazing. Giants signed defensive tackle Solomon Thomas for a 2-year, $10.2 million contract. Left outside linebacker Quincy Williams to a 3-year, $14.7 million contract. Running back Myles Gaskin to a 5-year, $20.5 million contract. Tight end Eric Enron to a 4-year, $23.6 million contract. Fullback Ryan Nall to a 2-year, $5.8 million contract. Left end Chase Winovich to a 3-year, $21 million contract. Defensive tackle Akeem Hicks, 2-year, $21.4 million contract. Center Ben Powers to a 4-year, $19.2 million contract. And receiver Kendrick Bourne to a 4-year, $50.4 million contract. After all these signings, the Giants still have a $7.13 mil cap space, and a couple needs that they need is center, quarterback, and right guard. Moving on to the Lions, who have a 21 mil cap space. We're going to be moving on to the Lions, who have a cap space of $21 million with some signings, which is cornerback Chandon Sullivan to a 3-year, $13.5 million contract. Cornerback Anthony Everett to a 3-year, $11.7 million contract. Right outside linebacker to Kaliki Hudson to a 3-year, $8.1 million contract. Quarterback Bailey Zappi to a 4-year, $16 million contract. Left outside linebacker Noah Dawkins to a 4-year, $11.2 million contract. Left guard Cody Ford to a 3-year, $13.2 million contract. Middle linebacker Raekwon McMillan to a 4-year, $12.8 million contract. And cornerback Josh Blackwell to a 2-year, $4.2 million contract. All this, and the Lions still need a quarterback, right guard, and a middle linebacker. Moving on to the Packers, who signed tight end Juwan Johnson to a 2-year, $6 million contract. And left end Michael Hotch to a 2-year, $6 million contract. Putting this at the Packers at $6.13 million positive in their cap space. And they need a free safety, tight end, and a center. Panthers up next with right tackle Titus Howard to a 3-year, $13.2 million contract. Right guard Terrence Steele to a 4-year, $15.2 million contract. Left guard Eric Flowers to a 2-year, $14 million contract. Middle linebacker Drew Tranquil to a 3-year, $15 million contract. Running back Trey Sherman to a 5-year, $17.5 million contract. Middle linebacker Ben Burr Curvin to a 5-year, $12 million contract. Cornerback Darius Phillips to a 3-year, $10.8 million contract. D tackle Tristan Hill to a 5-year, $19.5 million contract. Cornerback David Long Jr. to a 5-year, $16.5 million contract. And receiver Tyler Johnson to a 5-year, $21 million contract. And quarterback Tyler Huntley to a 5-year, $22.5 million contract. Now, with all these signings, the Panthers are now at negative $2.61 million in cap space. So I don't know why they made all these signings. Maybe it's for depth, or I don't know what it's for, but they just put themselves in the negative. A couple of needs they still need is quarterback, right outside linebacker, and tight end, according to Madden. We're going to be moving on to the Rams, who don't have that much cap space at $980,000. So they're on the verge of going negative. They signed D-tackle Tier Tart to a 4-year, $12.8 million contract. Receiver Paris Campbell to a 7-year, $42 million contract. Receiver Neil Harry to a 6-year, $25.2 million contract. Left outside linebacker Shioni Taki to a 3-year, $10.2 million contract. Right outside linebacker Andre Smith Jr. to a 4-year, $10.4 million contract. Again, that's leaving the Rams at $980,000 in their cap space. A couple needs they have are left defensive end, free safety, and cornerback. Up next, we're going to have the Saints, who have signed right outside linebacker Davion Taylor to a 5-year, $20 million contract. Cornerback Greedy Williams to a 4-year, $30 million contract. And that leaves the Saints at $8.85 million in cap space. A couple needs is center, left outside linebacker, and defensive tackle. Moving on to the Seahawks, who signed free safety Josh Jones to a 2-year, $9 million contract. Left end Dwayne Smoot to a 2-year, $16 million contract. Middle linebacker Cody Barton to a 2-year, $6.2 million contract. Center Jermaine Ifedi to a 1-year, $4 million contract. Left end Robert Quinn to a 1-year, $9.8 million contract. Center Ethan Posick to a 2-year, $12 million contract. Defensive tackle David Onimata to a 1-year, $8.4 million contract. And middle linebacker David Long Jr. to a 2-year, $6.2 million contract, leaving the Seahawks at $12.4 million left in cap space. A couple needs is right tackle, defensive tackle, and middle linebacker. Vikings didn't make any signs this offseason, leaving them at $2.24 million in cap space. A couple needs is strong safety, right outside linebacker, and quarterback. Hopefully that's what they get in the draft. Now moving on to some suspensions in the NFC coming into next season. For the Giants, it's going to be running back Saquon Barkley for the first 2 games of regular season, and also for the Giants, receiver Kadarius Toney for the first 4 games of regular season. Both suspensions for the Giants, which is running back and receiver, which is going to hurt them for at least their first 4 games. Next, we're moving on to the Saints, who have a suspension for Alvin Kamara for the first 4 games of regular season. And then lastly, the Panthers, DJ Moore for the first 4 games of regular season. So we're looking about 4 players at the start of next season from 3 different teams who will be suspended at the beginning of next season. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and then I'll be dropping another video here shortly with David's help. We'll be talking about the AFC. The AFC's off season next. So if you guys enjoyed the video, hit that follow button, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and leave a comment on what you liked and what you didn't like. All right, guys, thank you.